Hurro, hurro, hurro! Welcome to this video about the cautionary tale that is Qing China. By the time Europe was first getting started with the Renaissance, China had, for centuries, been the most technologically and culturally advanced state on earth. However, after centuries of believing in their own superiority and forbidding any and all change, Qing China was found by European imperialists to be backwards and inept, a paper tiger stuck in the distant past. I will explore this story and the message it tells, that change is inevitable, and if you fail to adapt to change yourself, change will eventually be forced upon you. If we are to talk about Chinese cultural stagnation, we need to explain how they got there. China has long had a very cyclical history. First, a new dynasty conquers the land, then they dominate the region for centuries, then the country becomes complacent and overly traditionalist, after which it decays, leaving it ripe for collapse and conquest by the next dynasty. By the late medieval era, China was incredibly advanced and powerful. I'll put a scrolling video of the Wikipedia page for China's historical inventions, but of special note is that China invented paper and printing, both vital for administering a grand empire, as well as the compass and gunpowder, which together make up the so-called Four Great Inventions. Beyond this, the Chinese were also responsible for huge advances in maths, physics, engineering, warfare, administration, and agriculture. Frankly, the Chinese were godlike in their advancements at the time. However, it only takes a few mad fools to bugger the whole lot up. In what seems now like a move of madness, Chinese Emperor decreed the 1434 Edict of Haijin, which strictly forbade any and all trade with the outside world, sealing China off from external influence and setting a centuries-long precedent of isolationism that didn't end until the Cultural Revolution. This was a massive change. Previously, the Chinese had even been set to become a dominant colonial superpower, even sending successful expeditionary voyages to uncivilized lands. But this opportunity that lay at the feet of China was never to be seized. It didn't stop with trade either. Believing that their culture and traditions were so superior, Chinese emperors effectively banned innovative thought. The ban on the sea trade was lifted in 1567, after which piracy dropped to a negligible level, and the Portuguese had been allowed to settle Macau 10 years earlier in return for helping the Ming fight off the pirates. However, after the Qing had conquered the Ming, they re-implemented the ban in 1647, with an even stricter form in 1661. Since that point, the gradual trend was for European colonial powers to grow in size, power and technological advancement, all whilst the Qing made no real advancement at all. This then all came to a head with the greatest private enterprise of all time, the British East India Company. As a trade company, all the EIC really wanted was profit. However, it did not take them long to realise that trade is much easier when you have a port of your own to manage operations, and even easier still when you are the one who makes the laws of the land. Now, conquering India was a mighty task, but still a possible one given that India was then a disunited jumble of states of various strength with their own objectives and alliances. By the time the EIC really got going, it was foolish for Indian states to resist them. China, on the other hand, was a huge unified imperial state, not one that would easily give in to demands. However, trade and colonialism are not zero-sum. Trade would have been in the interest of China, and limited trade was allowed, but centuries of cultural supremacism meant that the Chinese government had no desire to trade for Western goods, instead demanding only silver bullion. The EIC, driven by profits and running low on silver, were not happy about this, and so undertook a program of smuggling in something they had in abundance that the Chinese did want: opium. The immorality of a private company smuggling in drugs for profit is not lost on me, and for the record, I do often give the EIC as the clearest example of how pure capitalism is amoral at its core. But it is not for me to whinge now about the course of history. What's important is that when the Qing decided to crack down on the drug smuggling, the East India Company chose war. The First Opium War marks the start of what is known as China's Century of Humiliation. The Qing Empire, a massive and very popular state with great resources in history, was naught but a paper tiger. Massively outnumbered, British East India Company troops fought and won battle after battle, fighting with artillery, rifles, line formations, modern naval ships and modern command structures, against what seemed like medieval peasants armed mostly with spears and pitchforks, and the Chinese ships were literally called junks, a fitting name for how terrible they were against Victorian age vessels. To make a long story short, the British absolutely smashed them. This century of humiliation would continue up to the end of the Second World War, by which point China had faced repeated invasions, trade concessions, and even a civil war. Repeatedly, Qing China showed itself to be inept and powerless, yet throughout this period the Qing still arrogantly clung to their idea of perfection and failed to properly reform. This was not through happenstance, this was a deliberate policy by the Chinese emperors. It is astonishing to look back at the China from before isolation, a regional superpower far ahead of Europe or any other continent whose prospects only looked up. Their downfall was long coming, but ultimately avoidable. It wasn't that China got worse, but that the powerful empires around them got so much further ahead. Let this be a lesson to all leaders, be they of governments, corporations, or any other organisation. If you fail to adapt to change, change will eventually be forced upon you. Why do I say all this? This channel is about Britishness more than anything, not distant Chinese decay. Well, I think we should all take a valuable lesson from China. Amidst the ruins of greatness we find ourselves in, there are many ultra-traditionalists and people who call for return. To these people, I use Qing China as the example of what happens to a civilization that views itself as perfect and shuns all change. It is important to remember that technology and reality will move on. The policies of the past would not be able to deal with the problems of today. So, whilst it is beyond doubt that our past was certainly better than the bleak modernity we find ourselves in, our aim should be to return to the path we were on, not to any specific point on that path. This is what small c conservatism is all about. It's not about maintaining the liberal status quo, nor is it about returning to a glorified past. It's about sensible policy, in line with culture, that adapts to the changing reality of the world. Reform is a necessary part of dealing with the new challenges and opportunities brought about by geopolitical and technological change. Change for the sake of change will always be dumb, and we don't have to accept everything lying down, but nor should we ever become so arrogant as to think ourselves forever perfect. What we need is governance that allows us to excel in the future and allow our culture to flourish, and that does require occasional change. I hope that this video has gone at least some way in convincing you of that. Thanks for watching, and God save the King.